All right. Hello, everybody. It's Mr. Hilarides here. We're going to be starting our new unit. Our new unit is actually looking at our new type of government. Now, you might not know, but we actually had a constitution prior to the constitution that you guys know now. Um, Now, this constitution was called the Articles of Confederation. We need to go through that today so you can understand some of the good things and some of the bad things that may have come from it. But in this unit, okay, just some big ideas that we're going to be covering. First, Americans face the task of forming independent governments at both the state and national levels. The real big question for our new government was, where was the most of the power going to lie? Was it going to lie at the federal level, or was it going to lie at the state level? Another thing we're going to talk about our American leaders. Eventually decided that our first constitution, which was called the Articles of Confederation, just had too many problems and eventually needed to be changed. Unfortunately, they didn't agree with how it should be changed, but we're going to be talking about why. And then the Constitution is nation's fundamental laws, and we're going to be talking about the principles of our government. But first of all, we need to figure out what a constitution actually is. A constitution is actually a written plan for government. Now, if you remember, when we talked about the Magna Carta a few weeks ago, the Magna Carta was basically a constitution for Great Britain. A constitution is there to essentially put restrictions on the government. It's a set of rules that is actually written down. Now, most colonial constitutions, so statewide constitutions, were bicameral. Now, bicameral actually means two. All right. So they had a bicameral legislature. So very similar to what we have in Congress right now. So we have a Senate and we have a House. So we have a bicameral legislature. Now, this Constitution, they also provided for a governor and a court system. Now, if you remember when we talked about the Enlightenment, we talked about a few Enlightenment thinkers that came up with these ideas. So again, we're just taking past ideas and making them our own. Now, the Enlightenment thinker that came up with that idea, if you remember, was Baron de Montesquieu. He thought that it would be a good idea to make sure that we split up powers among branches in government rather than just giving it to one particular branch. The reason why? To make sure that one branch didn't gain too much power and become like a monarchy or a dictatorship. You needed to make sure that you had these checks and balances, just to make sure that nobody or no one group got too powerful. So why do we need a constitution? Like I said in the last slide, it's there to limit the government's powers. If this constitution wasn't here, if it wasn't written down, people in the government would be able to say, well, it's not written down, so really I can do this. Okay, I can keep going. I can run for office as many times as I want. All right. You don't get freedom of speech because it's not written down. All right. By having it written down, it limits the government. Also, government should protect your life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if you remember, John Locke came up with those. All right. Those are your natural rights. He came up with life, liberty, and property. And Thomas Jefferson, he tweaked it a little bit. And he calls it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But still, those are your natural rights. The government is there to protect those. All right. And by having a constitution that's written down, it's making sure that your rights aren't taken away. Okay. The government can't grow too powerful. So the Articles of Confederation, this was our first constitution. It was ratified in 1781 when the Continental Congress decided that since it looked like we were going to win the war. So if you remember, Yorktown happened in 1781. Soon after that, in 1781, the Continental Congress decided that we needed a government. This was our first government. Okay, the first government of the United States was the Articles of Confederation. Now, what a confederation is, a confederation is just a loose agreement among a group of people. All right. So it's very different from the Constitution that we have now. Now, there were some good things about the Articles of Confederation, but there are also some pretty bad things about the Articles of Confederation. Um, and because of those bad things, the Articles of Confederation didn't last. Confederations in general in history tend to not last at the country level. Now, beyond that, the global level, they've lasted fine because people can work together, and if you don't like what another country is doing, really you can just step away. But um, within a country, so if you have states that are just um, a loose confederation, you wind up having, like what we wound up having is 13 separate countries that have one common purpose. Now, so like I said, the Articles of Confederation were adopted uh, after the Revolutionary War seemed like it was over. So it was ratified in 1781, but it eventually was disregarded in 1787. A confederation is a loose organization of states. So it's almost like we had 13 little countries that were just working together for one common purpose. Um, our common purpose was they just came together for mainly defensive purposes. We hadn't signed a treaty yet with Great Britain, so therefore the war was still going on, and plus there was other countries out there that we were weary of. All right, so we came together for one purpose, mainly defense. Now, under the Articles of Confederation, more power was given to the states rather than the federal government. We had just fought a long war trying to break away from an extremely strong federal government, and we didn't want to do that. We didn't want a strong federal government. We had a lot of problems with our last strong federal government. So instead, we wound up giving more power to the states and having a weaker federal government. Overall, power is limited and the government is extremely weak on purpose. But this came back to bite the colonials in the butt in 1787. There were just too many problems because the federal government didn't have really any teeth to do anything. They didn't have any power. So why not give power to the national government instead? Okay, the states feared centralized government would limit their rights, okay, leading to a dictator or even a king. Okay, we just fought a war against a monarchy. We didn't want to have to deal with that again. All right. Thomas Jefferson. He wrote, "A government big enough to give you everything you want is strong enough to take everything you have." This was one side of the coin. At this point in 1781, when they created the Articles of Confederation, most people were on the side of Thomas Jefferson. They believed that we needed to have a weak federal government because, in the end, we don't trust a federal government. They don't truly know what we want. So we need to make sure that the state governments have more power. So a few things that they said. All right. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress and Assembly. Basically, what that's saying is more power is given to the states rather than the national government. Okay, it's literally written down in the Constitution. It's limiting that federal government. It's all about states' rights. Where should the power be? Should it be at the federal government or should it be at the state government? At this point, under the Articles of Confederation, our founders believed that it would be better at the state government. We still have this argument today. All right. It would be as if, like, let's say across the board, Mr. Kern said, you know what? Across the board, we are going to start wearing uniforms across the board. All right, because of problem that we've been having maybe in a couple of classes. But overall, everybody's got to wear a uniform. Okay, that's the power at the federal level. Okay, what they wanted was each class being able to make that decision for themselves. So let's say, you know what, my class, we're doing really well. I don't think that we need to wear uniforms. So by giving the power to the states, I'm allowed to make my decision based on the group of kids that I have in my class. All right, a couple more things. Okay, so in determining questions in the United States, notice that the U in United States is still not capitalized. All right, but states is. Okay, that's bringing up more of a point, saying the power is resided in the states. Okay, we're not technically unified. All right. But in determining questions in the United States in Congress assembled, each state shall have one vote. So it does not matter how many people you have in your state. Every state only gets one vote. It's all about equality. This became a problem eventually because states with larger populations wanted more say. So that actually comes up as one of the problems of the Articles of Confederation. The committee of the states, or any 9 of them, shall be authorized to execute in recess of Congress, such as the power of Congress, as the United States Congress assembled by the consent of 9 states. Basically, what that's saying in a nutshell is in order to pass any law, you need 9 out of 13 states, so 2/3 of the states to agree to pass that law. Each state getting only one vote. Now, that's extremely hard to do. In order to change or amend the Constitution, you need 13 out of 13 states in order to change the Articles of Confederation. Now, I know if I'm going out with a group of my friends, and let's say I have 13 people with me, if I ask, okay, where do you guys want to go to dinner? Chances are I'm not going to get 9 out of 13 of us to agree on even where are we going to go for dinner, let alone what kind of laws we should pass for our particular government. All right. The said states hereby severely enter into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the security of liberties, and the mutual and general welfare. Notice, all it's saying here is that the states are unified only for defense. It doesn't really sound like we're even a country. There's way more emphasis on the states rather than us as a whole. All right. It's almost as if the United States are more like 13 separate countries with just like a defensive alliance. All right. So some of the things that the national government under the Articles of Confederation could do. Okay. They're allowed to declare war. All right. At the federal level, they're allowed to declare war. All right. They're allowed to make peace after the war. So you got to remember, they passed this in 1781 when we were still in the war, so they definitely needed this power. All right. They're allowed to sign treaties. They're allowed to borrow money. Again, we're in the middle of a war still. We still need money, so we're still borrowing it. We eventually are going to need to sign a treaty to make peace. So really, all of the national government's powers are there because we were technically at war. All right. But the things that the federal government were not allowed to do, they're not allowed to collect taxes. In order to pay off these debts that we were borrowing from other nations, eventually we were going to have to pay them off. And the federal government, under the Articles of Confederation, had no way of getting money. The only way that they're able to get money from states is if states donated money to them, which rarely happened. All right. They couldn't control foreign or domestic trade. So if, let's say, if Virginia wanted to trade, I don't know, tobacco leaves to France, the federal government had no way of stopping them, okay, or no way of regulating that, okay. There was really no way of amending the Articles of Confederation unless you had all 13 out of 13 states agree on an amendment. That's practically impossible to do. All right. And they couldn't really force states to do anything. States were more powerful than the federal government. Okay, there were major problems with the Articles of Confederation. Now, there were a couple of good things that came from it. You had the Ordinance of 1785 and 1787. Now, what the Ordinance of 1785 did was it set up a system for surveying lands, western lands. So really lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. So mainly in this area right here. So if you remember what we got from the Treaty of Paris in 1783, we got the land east of the Mississippi, okay, and west of the Appalachian Mountains, so right around in this area. But if you remember, after the proclamation of 1763, people weren't allowed to move across the Appalachian Mountains into this area. So the federal government had to come up with a way to survey this land. So what happened was they created mile by mile plots. That's how we get mile roads now. All right. They wound up selling or giving that land away as farming ground to a lot of settlers that were moving west. But it set up that grid system. All right. This grid system that we had that we talked about before. So if you go downtown Detroit, it's easy to get around because everything's set up in a grid. That's because of the Ordinance of 1785. Eventually, this also helped set up the public school system. Ben Franklin really pushed for a public school system. He believed that as long as the population was there, every 6 miles, you should have a school. Now, if you go like east of DeQuinder, all right, near the mile roads, you'll notice every 6 miles or so, there's a new school district. That's mainly because the Ordinance of 1785. If you ever go on a flight and you have like the window seat, if you look down, you'll notice those mile by mile plots. Okay, they're still visible today. All right. And then finally, the Ordinance of 1787. This is considered the most important success of the Articles of Confederation. It directly affects us here in Michigan because it's dealing with the Northwest. This was considered the Northwest, this area right here, including Michigan. This law passed Congress that dealt with these Western lands right here. It outlawed slavery in the region, and it provided a system for territories becoming states. You needed to have to make sure that you had enough population. You had to have a government, and in this area, you had to have at least 3 to 5 states that were created. Now, if you look, 5 states were created. So you have Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Those were created because of the Northwest Ordinance. All right, we're done with notes for right now. Make sure that you take your quiz that's on the Google Forms that's provided underneath this video. Okay, we will see you tomorrow so we can talk about this. Have a good day.